So sorry about that. I think we had some technical issues there. So yes, welcome to the English Language Club. It's Tuesday, so it's time for our live stream, our live hangout. My name is Colin, and this is Tony.
Hello.
How are you doing?
Welcome. I'm doing all right. How about you?
Yeah, good.
A little discombobulated.
Yeah. Now we haven't got anybody watching right now, but let's just jump straight into. We got a lot of questions from Discord this week, mostly from Jack. So we will jump straight into those questions. I've got the first one here. Oh no, I had it, but now it's gone. So yeah, the first one is, what is a clause? Why do some languages have comparatively less clauses than others?
So anybody who's heard me talk about this knows that I love clauses. Clauses are a fantastic part of language. So I think last week we talked about, what is a clause is a difficult question to answer because you're going to get different answers in different places, right? Some textbooks will tell you one thing, a linguistics textbook will tell you something else. A clause is something that could almost or could actually be a sentence by itself, right? It has a subject, it has a verb, it usually has, some kind of action or whatever. It might be a whole sentence. And that's why the second half isn't exactly true, because every sentence has at least one clause in it, right? This in the sentence, this is a sentence. That is the clause. That is the main clause of the sentence, and it is the clause. But in English and in some other languages, many other languages, you can put many clauses into the same sentence. Sometimes by separating them out, it is a nice day and we are going to go to the park, right? Or sometimes they're all kind of nested inside each other. Like on this nice day, we decided to go to the park, having already had our breakfast with our friends. Like you can add on lots of little pieces to it and so on. So really it's about whether a language allows lots of clauses to group up in the same sentence, or if it kind of expects each clause to be its own sentence. And some languages do that. Each clause is kind of its own sentence.
Yeah. So how would you, in a nutshell, just to make things really simple and really clear, how would you define a clause?
A clause is the next step down from a sentence. It's something that could be a sentence, or maybe with a little change, it could be a sentence.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. Well, I hope that's helpful. We've got some people watching now. So Susanta's online. She says hello. I'll just bring that up. Hello. She says hello to us, basically. Hello, Colin. Hello to Tony. Hello to you. Get your questions coming in, because that's what we're here for. And we've got a few other people watching, so please do say hello in the chat so that we can say hello back, and get your questions coming in as well, because we would love to help you if we can. But yeah, for now, we're just going through some of the questions that we've received on Discord over the week. And here's another one from Jack. He says, is it unnecessary to use double quotes after already making use of the colon when intending to quote somebody?
That is a good question.
He's got an example here. He says Roosevelt is supposed to have said colon, then quotes, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
Right. So the one thing is, you always need double quotes around a quote. Always. The only way that you don't put double quotes is if you're not quoting, you're just saying, you're not saying it exactly. Like, he told me he was going to the market. You don't say he told me he was going to the market, right? But anytime you're doing a direct quote, you do need double quotes, always. The question really is like, what's going on with the colon? Why would you use a colon to introduce a quote instead of a comma? And the answer is a colon is only used after something that could be a complete sentence, so an independent clause. If the part before the quote could be a complete sentence by itself, then you use a colon. If not, you do not use a colon, you use a comma. But either way, you still need the double quotes. So in this case, Roosevelt is supposed to have said, comma, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Because the first part is not a complete sentence by itself. It's supposed to have said, well, that's not a complete sentence. So you would use a comma, not a colon.
Right.
However, colons are messy. A lot of times you see them used incorrectly. Generally, my advice to people is not to use colons unless you really, really know what you're doing, because they're tricky. And it's hard to find good examples because, like I said, you see them used slightly wrong a lot of the time.
Yeah. Now, Jack's next question leads is kind of.
Oh, is it? Oh, that's connected. Yeah.
It's connected. It's talking about single quotes. Now, I'm currently trying to learn the programming language Python, and so I've just learned that in Python, double quotes and single quotes mean exactly the same thing.
Except.
So how is it different in English?
Well, so single quotes. So the purpose of single quotes, as opposed to double quotes, is actually the same as it is in a programming language. The only reason that you need them is, like, how do you talk about a quote inside of a quote?
Yeah.
Right. And the answer is, each time you go in a level, you switch what kind of quote mark you use. So if you're in a quote and then you want to say a quote inside that, you use single quotes. For example, Susanna has a question, and she used quotes in her question. So if I wanted to quote her, I said, Susanna said, I would use double quotes. How do you use the phrase? And then I would use single quotes as such. And then I would end with a double quote. Right? So single quotes are not really a part of English punctuation. But what we use them for is when we're showing a quote inside of a quote. Right.
So it's just the way when you in a sentence where you need both, you use one, or where you need two quotes.
A quote inside a quote.
Yeah, you use one of each to differentiate them.
Exactly.
Yeah. Great. Okay, so we've got a few more people and a few questions coming in. So
shall we switch to the questions from the chat?
Yeah. And just to quickly say, Amari says, hello, sir. Hope you're doing great.
Welcome.
I want to ask whether dread is considered within the verbs that can be used with both infinitive and gerund with change of meaning. Some examples. Thanks. So dreading. I am.
Or to dread.
Yeah, to dread. With a change of meaning.
So if you mean, do they have a different meaning? I don't think so. So dreading is just the act of having dread or dreading something, right?
Like, which means like to be scared of, to have some fear for.
Yeah. And to dread, like, where would you use, my teacher told me not to dread the exams. I don't know. It's not a word that would commonly be used in infinitive, I think. But I don't think it changes the meaning. But it does have an infinitive and a gerund. Yeah.
Yeah, but then this sort of base form of the verb is also used like a noun, right?
It is a noun. The dread is a sense of fear, but you can also, I dread my exams. Like you can use it as a verb.
It's a verb as well.
Yeah. It is both a verb and a noun. So you don't have to say, talk about dreading as a gerund, because you can just use it as a noun. You don't say, dreading your exams is a terrible thing. You can just say dread is a terrible thing, or dread of tests is a terrible thing.
Yeah.
So if you have,
it doesn't change the meaning. I'm just trying to analyze the question and see if we've actually answered it.
Let us know if that answers your question, Omari, and if not, give us an example.
Yeah. Great. Okay, let's get on to the first of Susanta's questions. Susanta says, how to use the phrase as such. You sort of mentioned this one before, but we didn't actually answer it. So yeah, how do you use the phrase as such?
So
it's like, isn't it like saying, for example?
Well,
it's kind of synonymous with that.
People use it that way a lot of the time. I think we talked about the phrase per se in an earlier live stream a few months ago, maybe. And this is an example as well. So as such, it means literally or exactly. So you might say, if you're supposed to be social distancing and you go to a party and you say, oh, well, it wasn't a party as such. So you're saying it wasn't literally a party. It wasn't precisely or by definition. But you mean it really was, right? So saying something as such means that you're like looking at its precise definition as opposed to what it really means, right? You could say, oh, it wasn't cheating as such. You're saying it wasn't technically cheating or it wasn't literally cheating, but you're saying it. I mean, it really kind of was, right? But it's one of those phrases that gets used slightly wrong a lot too. So you do hear people just using it to say, just like to emphasize what came before or to try to give an example and that kind of thing.
And also, what about when people say, you could use it to say, kind of therefore. Would that be correct? It wasn't. It wasn't a party as such. So we didn't. No, that's kind of the example. That is the example you gave. Yeah.
So you could say, when would you use it as therefore? So we were tired, but we needed to go shopping. I can't think of an example of when you would use it, but yeah, you can use it to mean therefore. I'm not sure if that's right and proper of its definition or not.
I think it must not be.
I'm not sure if that's the definition of as such, but I have heard it used that way, but I can't think of an example. Yeah.
So I think that your first explanation there was the best one, that it means not quite the literal meaning.
Right. Yeah. So, but again, there's a lot of phrases that are sometimes used, a little bit in a little bit wrong ways, or maybe that means their meaning is changing, but it does mean sometimes it's hard to understand whether someone just made a mistake in using that phrase or not.
Okay, so shall we just quickly skip ahead to Amari's? He's got an example based on his previous question. So Amari says, for example, what is the difference between these two sentences? She dreaded taking the exam. Oh, and can you quickly write the next one, Amari?
Yeah, I'm very interested in what the other example is, but I think maybe we started too soon.
Yes, no, I didn't. Yeah, I mean, it could be if you were to say she is dreading taking the exam, then that's not a gerund. That's
not a gerund at all. No,
that's the continuous form of the verb. Here we go. And she dread to think of the consequences of her actions.
Right. So you don't say this with a third person, but you say, I dread to think. Right. I dread to think of the consequences.
I think that you could say that she dreads She dreads to think. That's
she
what's
dreads
wrong.
to think of the consequences.
With a
Maybe.
third person needs the S. I mean,
it would be the S, but I don't know if anyone would say it that way. Like,
yeah, I mean, grammatically,
yeah,
correct, but you wouldn't hear it very often.
But the dread to think phrase is something you say. I dread to think.
Yes.
Or I shudder to think of the consequences. But no, the meaning is not different. I dread taking the exam means like I have fear of it, right? I dread to think of the consequences means like I'm afraid to really think about the consequences. Now, I dread to think or I shudder to think is an idiom that has come to just mean, oh, it would be terrible. It doesn't necessarily literally mean I'm afraid to think of the consequences. But that is still what the word dread means there. So no, it's not changing the meaning of the word dread. But also, dread to is not an infinitive, right? That's the infinitive there is to think. To think. The to comes before the infinitive, not after.
And the other thing that's different between those two sentences is the tense. She dreaded taking the exam is the past simple tense. She dreaded taking the exam. Yeah. And then she dreads to think of the consequences. That's present simple. So yeah, that's the other thing that might be confusing you. But yeah, so we're saying that it's the same. The meaning of the word dread in those two sentences is the same.
Yes.
Yeah. Great. Okay, Omari, I hope that is helpful. Let us know if it is. Jax just jumped in with a quick question related to that, which is what is a gerund? So do you want to? Yeah, I'll just say a gerund is like the ing form. So it looks like you'd use in the continuous tense. Like I always use the example playing, because you could make a sentence, I like playing football. So in that sentence, the word play and playing is not a verb.
It's not a verb.
It's a gerund. So
a noun.
But it's which is a type of noun made from a verb. And so it means the activity of doing the verb as a noun.
It's the name of the activity, right?
Yeah.
So play is an action, it's a verb, right? And the name of that activity is playing. And we use the ing form for a gerund. But the ing form is used for other things as well, right? But when you're using the ing form as a noun, that is a gerund. And like Colin said, it's the noun for that activity, right? For that action. So eating, I like eating, walking, whatever.
Yeah, I mean, a great way to know or to sort of make it a gerund or to know if it's a gerund. If you say I like, then you know that like is the main verb of that sentence, and then any ing form after that will be a gerund, unless it's So
like Susanta says, I like playing does not mean I am playing, and exactly right. Because the playing in the sentence I like playing is not a verb; it's a noun, right?
Yeah.
So it's a completely disconnected from the noun, from that part of from the verb, from that part of the sentence, right? I am playing does not mean I am the activity of playing. No, because that's not a gerund. When it comes before the be verb, then it's a continuous tense. It's not a gerund. So it uses the same form, the ing, but it's not a gerund. It's part of the continuous verb. Which is why we like to focus on the not so much the form of the verb for understanding tense, but the auxiliary verb and the form of the auxiliary verb, because the form of the noun or the form of the verb is sometimes a little confusing because they mean other things. The ed verb form of a verb can be an adjective. The ing form of a verb can be a gerund or a noun, right? So it's always important to focus on the auxiliary verbs for understanding an actual what a verb tense is, right?
Yeah. So Amari's just got another quick follow-up.
Yes.
Just saying, would you please, teacher, tell me what is the equivalent expression of "I dread to think"? The
one I mentioned earlier, which is "I shudder to think."
Well, I think what Amari just wants to clarify the meaning of that. So
what does it mean?
It means like I worry that that something. So I dread to think that I will fail the exam. Similar expression would be I worry that I will fail the exam, or I am worried that I will fail the exam.
Yeah. So dread to think can mean you're worried about whatever comes after, or it can be just it'll be bad, or it would be bad, right?
Yeah.
It's like I dread to think what would happen if the opposition party wins the election. You're not saying you might be saying that you're worried, but you also might be saying it would be bad, right? Not that you're actually worried. So it can mean both of those things. Either it's bad or I worry about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, so you want the equivalent one that I said? I shudder to think.
Yeah, let's just type that in because the trouble is there's a bit of a delay, so we can't sort of have a conversation if we can't really wait for comments, responses to what we ask for, because there's quite a big delay between what we say and.
Do you mind typing it? I can't type it right now.
Sure. So what was it? Shudder to think.
I shudder to think. Yes.
Yeah.
And Susanta, dread means afraid. Yeah, Susanta typed it. It's okay.
Oh, cool. Thank you, Susanta. Yeah.
Dread means be afraid, but I dread to think either means you're worried or you just are saying that it's going to be bad. There you go, Omari. I thought that was what you wanted, but my keyboard is a little messed up right now. Sorry.
So I dread to think it equals I'm afraid. Yeah, in a way.
Well, dread means you're afraid. But dread to think either means you're worried or you're just saying it's going to be bad. Right?
Yeah, and you'd normally be talking about something
that's going to happen.
Something that's going to happen, something that has just maybe you've just heard about or something like that, like an election or whatever.
Right. Or weather.
Great. Yeah. Okay, so let's go back to some of Susanta's questions. But first, Gabrielle's just joined us. Gabrielle's from Italy, says hello. So hello to you. If you have any questions about learning English, please do type them in the chat and we'll do our best to answer them. So where did we get to? Oh,
and Aisha from Kerala, welcome. Oh, and Sonia from Honduras, welcome.
Oh, great. Oh, thank you all for joining us. So, okay, Susanta says she sat at an unfilled seat. Is this sentence okay? Well, you don't sit at a seat. You sit in a seat. So prepositions, prepositions are very difficult. But yes, unfilled that's okay to use that. But
you could also say
it would be more common to say an empty seat.
Probably more common.
An empty seat. Empty. Yeah.
You could also say I sat at an empty spot, right?
Yes.
Or I took an empty spot, right? I took an empty spot or an empty place or whatever. You sit at an empty table, right? Or you take an empty table, right?
So the preposition is sort of linked to the noun. So with the noun seat, you sit in a seat or on a seat, but you don't sit at a seat. But you do sit at a table, or at a spot. Yeah,
at a spot or a place or whatever. Yeah, yeah. In English, the preposition, it's much more about connection. With like prepositions go with certain activities or nouns or things like that. So it is very tricky. Yeah.
Great. Okay. Let me see. So another question from Susanta. Could you please explain the rules of articles? They're always confusing. Like, should I use the or a or no article.
The articles are confusing. They really are. The general rules are easy, right? You use the when you're talking about some specific thing, right? Like I please bring me the cup, as opposed to please bring me a cup. A cup would mean you don't care what cup, you just need a cup. But please bring me the cup means that you want a specific one. However, the next level of that is if something else in the sentence already showed that you're talking about a specific thing, then you leave off the. So you would say, bring me my cup, right? Because that you already know which one. So I don't need to say it's a specific one. So the cup, because I already said mine. Or bring me that cup, or something like this, right? So if you've already specified which one you mean, then you don't need to say the, even if you're just talking about a specific one, right?
But you do still need an article.
Well, you need a determiner, is what it's called.
Determiner.
A determiner. Right. So the is an article, but it's also a determiner. And you don't usually need more than one determiner. So a cup, the cup, my cup, that cup, those cups, this cup. But if it's not a determiner, it's just a description, that you'd still need to say, bring me the red cup. You still need the, right? To show that it's something specific. Now, and then when you don't use any article at all, it's either because there's some other determiner, or sometimes you're talking about things in general. Like, I like cups. You know, I'm not talking about a specific cup, the cup, or some cup, when I would say a cup.
Red cups, I like.
Or red, but yeah.
You might determine it with an adjective.
Well, So now then Susanta adds on this, what happens when you use abstract nouns, just time and happiness, right? And abstract nouns generally don't use articles, right? Unless, like, so for instance, time, you just say time had passed. But if you're talking about a specific, like a moment in time, then you would use an article. So we had a good time, right? Or I remember the time I went fishing with my parents, right? So when you're talking about the abstract in general, then you don't usually use an article. But when you're talking about using the abstract noun as a specific thing, so when you say, a time as in a moment or an event, right? Then you would use an article as normal, right?
Great. Okay, I hope
but
that's
they are
helpful.
Tricky, and the rules can just go. It really just takes getting used to it, because as in a lot of things in English, it's really about what words go together more than understanding the rules for a given word, right?
Okay, one more question from Susanta.
Well, actually, she had one more follow-up to that. Was, can you say the happiness of the people? And yes, though that's weird. The reason you do that is just because of the way we construct. It's based on the people. But yes, you do say the happiness of the people. They're worried about the happiness of the people. Yeah. And again, in a sort of way, it's because we're talking about a specific happiness, right? Not just happiness in general, but a specific. So just like with, if you talk about time, time goes by, you're just talking about time in general, you don't use an article. Just like when I'm talking about cups or houses in general, I don't use an article. But when you start talking about something specific, you either use the or a determiner to talk about a specific one, or just one of them, then you use a. When it's not, you're talking about an individual, but not a specific individual. One of those, you use a. Right? So it's sort of the same rules, but abstracts are a little bit trickier. So I hope that helped.
Yeah. Great. Okay. Thank you very much for that question. So one more from Susanta for now, and then there's some other questions from other people later on. But keep questions coming in.
Yes. Semantic questions are always exciting.
Yeah. Sometimes journalists use "if you like" at the end of a sentence. When do they use it? Yeah. So when do we say "if you like"?
So if you like has a couple of different meanings, but the one I think that you're thinking of, which would be used more commonly in journalism, is it basically says that what came before it is a figure of speech, right? And so it's a warning to let you know you need to interpret that bit before it a little bit differently, right? So you could say, they had a great game. It was a real battle, if you like. So that you're saying, you could say it was a battle, but you realize that you're using a figure of speech there, right? That kind of thing. Yeah. So it's a signal to interpret what they just said as maybe something that's not literal.
Yeah, because sometimes when people say things non-literally, that is a way that people misunderstand them. Right. So I guess to clarify, don't take me literally. You can say, if you like.
And that's why you see this phrase a lot in journalism and not very often other places, because the journalists like to use, like writers like to use figures of speech and idioms and expressions, but they don't want to be misunderstood. Yeah, exactly. So they'll use the expression, "Oh, it was a real battle," if you like, meaning, if you understand what I mean. Or another times they might say, if you know what I mean. Right? It's a signal that you need to interpret something non-literally. Yeah. There's a couple of other uses for it as well, but I think that's probably what Susanta's looking for.
Great. Okay, thank you. Actually, we've got another question for Susanta, but first, another one from Umari, who says, "Teacher, do we say 'don't lose the smile' or 'don't lose smile'?" So this, I think, ties in with the article, the question, Susanta's question about articles. But yeah, talking about smiles this way is not very common.
Well, I think the phrase is, "don't lose that smile," right? But it's not a super common idiom. No. But I think it's "don't lose that smile," right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So. Yeah, but it'd be more common to say "keep smiling."
Keep smiling,
or "don't stop smiling."
Yeah.
Yes, but in that idiom, it's the word "that," not "the."
Yeah. Don't lose that smile. But again, not very common. I literally can't think of the last time I heard that. So.
Yeah. So I hope that's helpful, Amari. Let us know if maybe you can give us another example if the word "smile" is confusing our answer. Maybe you could give us another example. Okay, then Susanta's got another question, and then we've got one from Gabrielle afterwards.
No, we answered this one.
Oh, we did?
Yeah.
Oh, yes, because we jumped ahead. Okay, so question from Gabrielle. As a learner, is it important to get the difference between voiced and unvoiced sound, or can I just skip that in speaking? Well, yes, it is important. Because they are different sounds. And so if you think of the word think, that is unvoiced. And so I think you're saying that you're struggling to make it voiced, maybe. So what is a voiced word? A word that has that sound voiced? That
or that.
Yeah,
right?
That. Yeah. And yeah, I think it is. I think the voiced one people do have more trouble with. Those are words where it often comes out like a "d." So just you remember that pronunciation is physical, and when a sound is voiced, the sound is coming from vibrating the vocal cords. So I think if you need to be clearer on what that means and get accustomed to doing it. So yeah, that. This, those are all examples of the voiced sound.
Yeah, and the difference between like think and this, right? They both have, it's both THI, but think and this, right? It does sound very different, and if you're mixing those up, people are going to have a hard time understanding what you say.
And it feels very different to say as well.
Yeah, which is a good clue.
Your mouth, everything's in the same position, but it feels very different because you are voicing it. So yes, it is important to voice out, with all those what are they called, the paired consonants, where one is voiced and one isn't. It's important to get that. So it's worth practicing.
Yes.
So thanks for that question. I hope that's helpful. Let's see.
I think the next question is also from Gabrielle.
What is it?
About words with multiple different pronunciations.
This one? Oh no, that's the one we just did.
The next one, yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Sometimes I come across words, even very common, with double or triple different pronunciations. How to overcome it if we're supposed to? For instance, interesting, homogeneous, diverge.
So for example, some people say interesting. Some people say interesting, right? The difference between whether you pronounce that first E. Some people pronounce homogeneous. Other people pronounce it homogeneous. Diverge. Some people pronounce diverge. Some people pronounce diverge, right? And this is, sometimes there are words that are commonly mispronounced, but in these three words, this is accent, right? This is just a regional difference in how people say words, right? Someone from one place might say interesting. Someone from another place might say interesting. Neither of them is wrong. They're just two different pronunciations. If you look it up in the dictionary, it'll have one that is official. Sorry.
Yeah, the same person might say use two different. It's a matter of intonation.
It is,
as well as just accent and regional accent.
Exactly, and that's true of accent in a lot of different ways. But yes, it is also true of intonation. So if you say interesting quickly, you probably don't pronounce that first E. But if you're saying it more slowly, interesting, you probably wouldn't say it interesting, because it sounds weird to say it slowly without pronouncing that E. So, and there's a lot of examples, like you're saying, of words that people pronounce them slightly differently. And sometimes they pronounce them differently at different times. Well, they're not wrong. So you don't need to worry about it. You don't need to overcome it. The general rule is whichever pronunciation is easier in whatever sentence you're saying, however you're saying it, that would be the correct way to say it, right? Sonia is asking important. So some people say important, like almost with a U, important. Some people say important. And some people, like it's like a schwa, important. Like you almost don't even pronounce the last syllable or the last vowel, right? And again, that none of those are wrong. Right?
No.
So you don't need to worry about, am I doing it this way or this way? Just pronounce it whichever way is easiest in your sentence you're trying to say. Right? So that's actually some good news, where one of the little weird things about English doesn't actually make it harder.
I was just going to say, it's an interesting, I guess it's a whole area of phonetics, which at English Language Club we don't get into for people trying to learn English, because it's I think a lot of it comes naturally as you become more fluent, you become more expressive, you express yourself through your intonation, and it's not something that's worth thinking about. You don't think, to emphasize this, I'm going to slightly extend the A or slightly emphasize the A sound. Whilst if you're into phonetics, it's interesting to observe that and maybe make a note of how that happens. it's not something that you want to think about as someone trying to learn English and how to use your intonation. It sort of just happens naturally. It kind of ties in with our emotion and
Exactly.
what we're trying to express. And it's probably the same in lots of other other languages. Yeah.
Yes.
So it's not really worth thinking about too much. But yes, there's an infinite number of ways of having a slightly different pronunciation of any word, whether that's through accent or an intonation for emphasis.
Now, Zahira, our faithful Facebook follower, did point out. So if you want to bring up Zahira's comment, hi there, and hi Zahira, always good to hear from you. But doesn't the different pronunciations have to do with word class? And absolutely, sometimes, right? So we always use the example of to produce something or produce. Right, like when you go to the grocery store, the fruit and vegetables or the produce, right? So sometimes, yes, the difference usually in stress, either near the beginning of a word or near the end, has to do with whether it's a noun or a verb. But sometimes differences in pronunciation aren't. So there's not. When I was young, I used to think homogeneous and homogeneous were two different words. Because where I grew up, people say homogeneous milk for whole milk, that kind of, homogenized milk or something like that. And in science classes, I heard, homogeneous solutions or whatever. And I assumed they were two different words. But they're not. People just pronounce them differently, sometimes in different contexts. Sometimes it's just different people. Sometimes it depends on how fast they're talking. There's no difference between the word homogeneous and homogeneous, right? There is a difference between the word produce and produce, right? So yes, sometimes the difference, usually if it's a difference in stress, not so much pronunciation, but stress, usually that's a difference between a noun and a verb, right? But in all of the examples that Sonia and Gabrielle gave, those are all just differences in accent or differences in how people say things. As Sonia said, intonation is important, but sometimes there are equally correct ways to intone or to pronounce a word. I've definitely heard people argue over whether, not so much with homogeneous, but whether heterogeneous or heterogeneous is the correct pronunciation. I've heard people really argue about it. But the reality is that both are correct. One of them might be the official that you'll find in a dictionary, but the other is just a variation.
Yeah, great. Thank you for that, Zahira, because that is a very common topic that often comes up when teaching English. But what I would say is that they're actually different words. They're spelled the same. Words. They're pronounced very similarly, but they are different words because one's a noun and one's a verb.
And this is a trick, right? To be able to tell, I hear this word being pronounced two different ways. Is it two different words, or is it one word pronounced two different ways? And as long as you're sure that it's not two different words, then it's fine. You don't have to worry about which one you're saying. So I think we have questions from Pinar and Sonia as well. Sonia, go ahead and ask your question. Go for it. I think our next question is from Pinar.
Yeah, Pinar. Here's Pinar's question. Hello, I am not sure what kind of question we should ask because hang on. Because is this the one? I didn't watch it. I didn't watch it before. But could you give some examples from pull a few string? I saw that nearly, but I don't know how to use it.
So welcome
to pull
Pinar.
strings. Yes, welcome.
Yeah, that's a perfect question. We have a lot of people asking questions about an expression or an idiom that they want to know, how to use them. So that's an excellent example of the kind of question that we answer all the time.
So to pull strings, how is that? That's a kind of a common idiom. What does it mean?
So pull strings, or say, I need to pull a few strings. For one, it is always plural. I mean, you can talk about pulling a string, but you couldn't have pull a few string without it being plural. But if the idea is that this is like calling in favors or using your influence. So we say that, if you have influence over someone, you've done them favors in the past, you have a good relationship with them. Sometimes we'll use the expression, you're tying a string. So you now have influence over that person, and you can pull on the string to get people to do what you want. It's a little bit like puppets, like marionettes that are hanging on strings.
I think that must be the origin, yeah.
And
it's almost like
idea,
you can manipulate a little bit, but not really.
Influence.
Yeah,
that's the thing. Influence. The puppet idea comes from manipulating people. But nowadays, the saying "I'm going to pull a few strings" doesn't mean manipulate. It doesn't. Sometimes it's seen as a bad thing. People have too much influence, but most of the time, pulling strings is seen as a good thing. Like you've done favors for people, and so they will help you out if you need it. People who can help you with situations. So when you need some help, you'll pull a few strings. It basically means using your connections, right? Your strings are your connections. Using your connections and using your influence to do things.
Great.
Yeah, great question.
Yeah, I hope that's helpful. Pinar, let us know if it is, if you've got a follow-up question. Now, I like this question from Sonia because I don't think this is something that's ever come up, but it is something that I've thought about. So Sonia says, what ways can I use get in English? So get is a really interesting verb. Because it doesn't really, it's used in lots of different ways. So the most sort of standard definition would be like is similar to bring. Go and get. I need to get a coffee, or I need to bring a coffee, or I need to get something. But it's used but that's the sort of easy definition. What's probably confusing you, what you're probably asking about, is more things like when we say it's going to get dark soon. So in that sentence, it's not like the main verb, is it? Because it is. It's going to
get. Yeah. So it's just the future.
Going to for the future, and then get dark. So it's a way of making an adjective or the act of an adjective becoming true, in this case, dark. It's a way of saying that is going to happen, or it's going to become the case. So it's not dark now, but it's going to get dark, or it is getting dark. That means that adjective, although not true now, will be true soon. It is. I'm not explaining this very well, am I, Tony? How would you explain it?
Well, no, I mean, that is true. The thing about the word get is that it used to be much simpler than it is now, because nowadays we don't, I think, grasp the fundamental meaning of it. The word get is like the word become. Like become means you or something is changing. Get means you're going to possess or own something, or it's going to be a part of you. So you can get knowledge. It's like to have, to receive, or to take ownership, or to obtain. You can get knowledge. That's why we say, oh, I get it, right? We're saying, I get the knowledge, right? Or you can go and get an object. Well, now you have it, right? Before you didn't have it, now you have it. I went and got a book, or I got a new book at the library. You bought it. You didn't own it, and now you do own it, right? You possess it, or it's part of you. But because of that meaning, it's like the become of possession or having. It's like the become is like is, except something is changing. Get is like have, except something is changing, right? I have this, but I went from not having it to having it, so I got it, right? Like, oh, I get it. I understand. The knowledge is mine now, right? So when you use this with an adjective, like, or it's getting dark, or I'm getting tired, you say, before I didn't have tiredness. It wasn't wasn't part of me. Well, now I do. I received the tiredness. Now, you didn't literally receive the tiredness, but that it's basically the verb that shows changing of what you have, right? I am tired. So you can say become, right? I became tired, but we don't usually say it that way. We say I got tired, right?
Yeah.
Or the day got dark, or it's getting rainy, right? So getting is always about changing from not having something to having it. But have can be metaphorical, right? Like I don't have tiredness.
Yeah,
but
because
I am
it can
tired.
be. It's more literal if you're talking about a noun, but we can also use it with adjectives when it's not literal, but it means they will become true. Those adjectives.
Yes. Yes, exactly. So it's like become.
So,
it's exactly the same kind of construct of the way the word become works, but it's usually about having something or like being, having a property or having a status. So it's a really interesting word because it's one of those words that's about changing your status or changing your knowledge or changing your possessions, right? So it gets used in a lot of different ways, including in passive verbs, right? I got hit by a car, right? But it's about, at first I wasn't, I wasn't hit by a car, and then I was hit by a car. It's about the change from not having something to having something. Right. So Xanthi gave the example, I got to the station, right? I arrived, I got there. So before I wasn't there, now I am there. Right.
Yeah. I think it's a relatively new thing, and something that's quite unique to English in a way, isn't it? Because I know that from my experience in speaking Spanish, they say está oscureciendo to mean it is getting dark, but the literal translation would be it is darkening, which you could, which makes sense, but no one would ever say it like that. People would just say it's getting dark. So I think it's a kind of a new way of.
Well, it is unique to English, but the reason it's in English and not in Spanish and French and these sorts of things is not because it's new in English. It's because it comes from one of English's other ancestors. This does not exist in Latin, so it doesn't exist in French and Spanish. This comes from like Norse, like Old English. And so Goethe is like Germanic, right? So probably German speakers, I don't know German very well, but certainly Danish speakers or Icelandic or Norse speakers would be like, well, that's a perfectly clear word. But in English, it kind of clashes with words like become. And so it feels weird, but it means kind of that same thing. So it's not new. I mean, it's been around since before the Vikings and all this stuff. But it's unlike most other European or Indo-European languages. Yeah.
Now, it's great. I wanted to talk about that because it's something that I've thought about in the past and that I find really interesting. But actually, Sonia's question was originally, what ways can I use get in English? And we've only really talked about two of them, the kind of literal meaning of the verb get to bring something or to go and take something, and this slightly metaphorical way. But then it's also used a lot in phrasal verbs. To get up, to get down, to get off, to get up, to get off, to get on,
get up, it's used with with learning, right? Oh, I get it now, it's used in passive verbs.
That one.
Right? I got hit by a truck. I got fired. Right? When you're trying to say that something happened to you, but you don't want to say who did it. Get along, English with Heidi points out. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, to get along with somebody.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's got lots of uses, the word get. So it's a fascinating verb. Okay. So let's see, what's the next question? Oh, actually, Suzanne pointed out another one. Also, get for travel. For example, I got to the station.
I think we did. I think we missed a question from Aisha earlier. Not a question, though. They said the importance of English transcription. So I don't know if they were asking a question about that.
Yes. So the importance of English of phonetic transcription.
Phonetic transcription. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of. I mean, it's a tool. It's a tool. It's there for you to use. You don't need to know it. Most English speakers don't know phonetic transcription, and phonetic transcription is not something that belongs to English.
No.
It belongs to all of speech. So do you know how to phonetically transcribe words in your own language? Probably not. But it is a useful tool if pronunciation is something that you're struggling with. So So at the English Language Club, we're not big fans of learning phonetics or learning grammar, or we're about, because that loses sight of the end goal that most people have, which is to be able to speak English or to express themselves effectively in English. And I feel like a lot of people get very into phonetics or very into grammar, and then they start using all these, sort of showing off because they know all these these special terms, and these terms, like, okay, that's impressive, but it's, especially in grammar, there's often multiple words for the same thing. So the more you start using those specialist words, the more likely you are to be misunderstood or not understood. Even by us. So these things are tools. They're not the be all and end all. But phonetic transcription is helpful.
Very helpful.
Sonia says good Spanish. I think she must be referring to when I said oscurriendo, which is great. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Tony and I actually met in South America, in Paraguay, where I lived for 7 years. Well, how long were you there? 4 years?
3 years.
3 years.
3 years.
Yeah. So, great. Let's see. We've got lots of comments, and I know there's some questions in here, but I can't find them.
So let's see. Well, quickly, Sonia said getting. So getting would be anytime you're using a continuous tense with get. So rather, it got dark would be the past tense, but it is getting dark would be the present continuous, right? Like, so you just use that anytime that you're using a continuous tense, right?
We're going to have to add a module on get to the course Inside English, because
well, we'll probably put it in the passive sections, but we'll do a couple
the
of
way that
lessons on
it takes the ing form there when the sentence is continuous, even though the main verb. Well, no, it is the main
getting
verb.
Is the main verb. But getting also functions as an auxiliary verb when it's being used to show the passive. So get is a really interesting verb. Have is as well, and just really, really interesting. Now we do have a couple of questions. We have one from Susanta, and one from Gabrielle, and one from Zahira.
Okay, is this the one from Susanta about counting?
Yes.
Can you give an example continuing? Sorry. Can you give an example sentence with and continuing?
As a phrase, or just
and continuing.
I mean, what comes to mind is what you said with and counting. Like, we've been doing this this live stream for 13 months and counting. It just means and going. It means and continuing, right? And more. I can't think of an and continuing as a phrase at the end.
Yeah, I mean, Susanna's often talking about news articles and things. So you could say there have been 1,000 deaths from COVID and and continuing. Yeah, but you would say and counting if you're talking about
if it's a number. So if you're using something
number.
that's not a number, instead of saying and counting, you could say and continuing. But I can't think of an example. Like that doesn't seem as common a phrase as saying and counting at the end. And counting means and continuing. Like it's not done. It doesn't stop here. It's going to keep on going. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, hopefully that helps. Let us know if it does. If you've got an example sentence yourself, let us know and we can talk about that. But there's a great question here from Zahira, so we'll move on to that. Last time, me and one of my colleagues had a hot discussion about the difference between drawing and painting. And I have to admit that I lost over the pronunciation of drawing, since I personally pronounce it with a DJ sound, so j.
Drawing. Yeah.
Yeah,
drawing. Yeah.
Drawing. Yeah, that's okay, I think.
Drawing. Yeah.
But yeah, so what is the difference between drawing and painting?
Well, painting has changed in its meaning some over the years since computers, because nowadays a lot of times people will talk about things painting when it's on a computer. And so on a computer, painting and drawing, if there is a difference, it's not an English difference. It's a terminology within whatever program you're using or whatever art form you're in. But in English, drawing means using a pen or a pencil, or occasionally an ink brush. But usually that would even be called painting. In English, painting means using a brush or using paint.
Using paint, yeah.
But it could be both, right? You can paint, like if you're using a brush or some other kind of implement to smear something around, people say, oh, they were painting on their plate with their mashed potatoes. You wouldn't say they were drawing on their plate. Drawing specifically means using a pencil or a pen or something like that with ink. And painting either means using a brush or using some kind of a thicker medium like paint. But on a computer, they kind of mean the same thing, depending.
I think though, because the origins come from using a pen or a pencil, something with a fine line, then a drawing refers to a piece of art that is
with fine lines.
Well, where the shape is the most important thing, whereas a painting, the color is there can be color in a drawing, but it's more about the form and the structure. That's the most important thing. Whereas in a painting, it's more about how the color is applied.
That's true, except that there are certain either programs or styles where almost the opposite, like where the meanings are very different. So yes, I generally tend to agree with you. Painting is more about color or the medium, whatever you're using, the paint. Or whereas drawing is more about the tool, or it's more about the lines. But especially when you talk about it, see, art has its own terminology, right? But in English, that is probably about as correct as you'll get. Paint is either about a brush, or it's about the medium, or it's about the color, whereas drawing is about a pen or ink or lines, or shapes. But if you go technical definitions, then you'll get much more precise things. Yeah.
Great. Yeah. Okay. I think that's answered that. Now, somebody was asking, can you recommend a good book about the history of the English language? I'm interested in how words change their shape over time. Tony, have you got any ideas of a good book?
So,
I do know of a good YouTube video, which I'm just going to look up while Tony's speaking.
There are several really good YouTube videos. Yeah, that's true. I've read several, and I wouldn't recommend any of them. Just because there were things I didn't particularly like about them. What I will say though is you can't read a book about the history of language that's an old book, because a lot of what we understand about the history of language has very much changed and is constantly changing. So if you read a book about the history of language, of any language, just find the newest book on that topic you can. And then don't just necessarily believe everything it says, because some of it might be theories that will turn out to be false. But it will give you a lot about how words have changed. So if you're not trying to do an academic study, just pick up any fairly new book about it, and you'll learn a lot about how words have changed. Right?
Yeah. And what I was going to recommend is there's a series of videos on YouTube called The History of English in 10 Minutes. There's 10 one-minute videos. Here is a link to the first one there. So yes, they're very sort of fun little videos giving the broad strokes of how English came to be. So yeah, Tony, you might like to see them as well. I don't know if you've seen them.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to have to draw things to a close soon. We've got a lot of
good questions.
Still got a lot of questions. We've got a lot of questions from Jack coming in.
Well, it's just one question. It's just one really long rumination. Can we very quickly answer Zahira's question? Or no, did we do Zahira's question?
Which one?
Just the most recent one. I can't see it anymore, so.
Oh, I see.
We did do that.
Yeah.
Okay, we got
it.
That's fine.
Drawing and painting.
So I think the only one left is Jack's then.
Okay.
So yeah.
Great. So similar to each other. To me, this seems to indicate nouns, person, places, and things. Actions too, just that they are slower and difficult to feel the change happening.
So, Jack,
true?
he can still see your comments. They're not on YouTube anymore, but Colin can still see them. You're thinking very philosophically now, Jack, instead of about the language. So if you're thinking of it at that point, I wouldn't encourage you to think of gerunds as being somehow like the noun. It's the name of that activity, right? Like baseball is a noun, right? Or soccer, or football, or hockey, or tennis. Those are nouns. That they represent the idea of an entire sport, right? It's just one word that represents a lot, right? So gerunds are just the name of an activity, right? Walking it's not connected to the word walk, except that it's the name of that activity. It's not a verb anymore. It's the noun, just like produce and produce, right? They're two different words that mean different things, but they refer to each other, but they're not the same word. So a gerund is just a name. That's the way I like to think of it.
Yeah, sorry, Jack. I didn't see that you'd deleted those comments, but because they still come up on the thing that I see. So anyway, I think that's going to be a good place to leave it for today. It's 5:10. Same time next week, Tony.
I think so. Let's remind everyone that you can post questions in the Discord. Jack, we started with a couple of your questions, so you'll probably want to go back to the beginning and watch those. We'll get to some more of them next time. But everyone, if you have questions and you think of them, put them in the Discord because then you know that we'll see them. There's a whole section there, questions for the live stream.
Yeah, there's a whole channel. I think channel for the Discord. Unfortunately, we didn't actually get to all of Jack's questions from the Discord. So we've got a couple for next week, even if we don't get any other questions. But if we do get a lot, maybe we can just do the Discord questions.
Yes. So everyone, the link is in the description to the video. I don't know how it looks on Facebook, but if you go into the description on YouTube, the bottom link is the Discord server. Yeah. So join, introduce yourself, and say hi and ask your questions.
Yeah. Great. Okay. Well, thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you next week. Whoops. What have I done? This is what I meant to do. No, that's what I meant to do.